Starsector very well might be my favorite game of all time. Alright, it's probably not, but I struggle to think of very many games I like more than Starsector. If I had to play just one game for the rest of my life, I would seriously consider choosing it, and if I had to choose my top 5 games of all time, I would not have to think twice about Starsector getting a spot. I've been playing the game since 2013, but it doesn't feel at all dated or stale since it's reinvented itself more times than I can count on the way to reaching its full potential. If you're not familiar, there are 2 core elevator pitches for what Starsector really is. The first is that Starsector is a game primarily about organ harvesting and war crimes. The second, slightly more serious pitch boils down to Mountain Blade in space. But if you're not familiar with Mountain Blade, it can be a little difficult to simplify this specific type of game down to a few short sentences. Before we talk about everything the game has become, let's turn back the clock a bit, because Starsector was a very different game when I first encountered it on Total Biscuit's channel in 2013. For one thing, the game wasn't even called Starsector. Starfarer, as it was called at the time, was originally little more than a proof of concept, a series of missions designed to showcase the game's combat systems, art style, and ship designs. Even just this proof of concept was compelling, but the truly exciting part came shortly before I picked up my key in early 2013. Starsector's initial campaign mode allowed you to seek out randomized battles with NPC fleets in an open solar system. The gameplay now took place on 2 distinct screens. Combat still took place with an up-close and personal view of the participants, but navigation took place on a new, zoomed-out world screen to give you a more complete view of your surroundings. The additions of extremely bare-bones fleet management systems and persistent progress between battles were just the first hints of the game's exceptional future, and figuratively speaking, the camera never really stopped zooming out. Shortly after I started playing, hyperspace was added to the game, allowing you to travel between multiple solar systems in a slightly more fleshed out world, and after that, it was off to the races. Over the course of the next decade plus, Starsector has grown exponentially. Today, Starsector's core worlds, the handful of inhabited systems that remain consistent from save to save, are just the center of a much larger procedurally generated sector. After a brief scripted scenario that serves as both a tutorial and a lore primer, the players dropped into the center of this sector with little to no direction. But self-preservation is a strong motivator. Pirates and extremists deal out violence in even the most civilized areas, and there are few heroes, even among the core factions, who aren't friendly as much as they are preoccupied with much bigger problems than you. Starsector's combat is undoubtedly still its crown jewel, thanks to the unique balance between commanding your fleet and manually piloting your personal ship. A clever series of orders is just as viable a path to victory as some fancy flying, allowing each player to play to their strengths as well as the strengths of their fleet. Combat is responsive, as is the ship AI, which isn't groundbreaking but is quite solid. Ships give a real sense of damage as the battle progresses, acquiring visible hull damage as they get hit by a variety of weapons that really feel like they pack a punch, thanks to some stellar effects. Ships span all different sizes, from wings of small fighters to the large carriers that house them, and the bigger ships have a quite satisfying explosion effect when their reactor fails, although it will flashbang you a bit if you're playing in a dark room. Overall, combat is both a tactile and a tactical experience, though I will say that every time I come back to the game from an extended break, I'm caught slightly off guard by the drifty nature of some ships, especially the larger ones. Ships taking some time to get up to speed makes plenty of sense, but them having a similarly difficult time coming to a stop or changing direction can definitely feel a bit weird at first. Overall, Starsector's combat is exceptional, but there is a noticeable learning curve. Thankfully, you have options, because Starsector is no longer a game just about combat. Sure, it still plays a central role, but Starsector's economy of supply and demand provides ample opportunity to turn a profit without firing a shot, whether you're doing business for one of the major factions or smuggling illegal goods. Those same major factions also put out bounties as well as planetary survey contracts, luring you out of the comfort of the core worlds into the depths of space, where a whole new set of dangers wait. There's nobody to protect you from pirates now, and beacons ominously warn explorers away from abandoned systems. But the biggest danger is no secret at all. Uninhabited space provides no opportunity to resupply or refuel, and getting stranded is an ever-present risk. There's profit and treasure to be found around every corner, but no treasure is greater than the ability to return home. Whether you're braving the cold depths of space or the instability of the core worlds, you'll need ships for the job, and this is where Starsector is at its strongest. Starsector's endless supply of unique ships aren't just fancy sprites, they're mechanically unique, all designed with a specific role or purpose in mind. Although Starsector has a lot of content, it doesn't actually have a lot of redundancy. Everything added to the game fills a legitimate need, and this means your fleet will look very different depending on your focus. A trading fleet will likely contain a variety of cargo freighters flanked by an anti-pirate escort. A smuggler will value speed, a bounty hunter will focus primarily on combat ships, and an exploration fleet will probably seek out well-rounded, low-maintenance ships alongside some extra fuel tankers so that they can actually get home. Even within these roles, ships vary widely. High-tech ships feature phasing technology, energy weapons, strong shields, and other unique gadgets, whereas low-tech ships, which are far more widely available, utilize more known technologies, heavy armor plating, ballistic weapons, and missiles. Either way, each ship is fully customizable, with hull modifications, fighter bays, weapon hardpoints, and NPC captains, all allowing you to specialize each ship in your fleet down to the very last detail. All these different ships present the player with a variety of strategies, but they also help differentiate the factions that use them. I've decided to mostly neglect the lore of Starsector in this video, since the world building is more than complex enough to take up an entire video on its own, but it's probably worth briefly going over the setting of Starsector as well as the game's primary inhabitants. The game takes place in the Persian sector, an isolated part of space that has fallen into a bit of a dark age in the 200 years since the gates connecting the sector to the rest of civilization collapsed. The domain, mankind's central government, is now functionally extinct, splintering the sector into multiple distinct factions in the wake of the 200-year power vacuum. At the lower end, the pirates, who are barely united enough to be called a true faction, are found primarily using other faction scraps. Broken down, modified, cobbled together low-tech ships make up the bulk of pirate fleets, representing their poor logistics and complete lack of allies. They hate everyone else only marginally more than they hate each other. If the pirates exist outside of the law, the hegemony is the law. The hegemony represents the domain military forces trapped in the Persian sector by the collapse, and they've enacted martial law in an attempt to establish order and prevent the fall of civilization. Their armor-plated fleets are the dominant force in the sector, but while they aren't exactly evil, their lack of familiarity with the word nuance has led pretty much everyone else to hate them almost as much as everyone hates pirates. The Persian League was formed as a natural response to the tyranny of the hegemony. The League is an alliance of worlds brought together not by mutual affection, but in an attempt to form a united front against the sector's dominant force. This attempt has been largely successful, and the League stands nearly as the hegemony's equal, protecting each member planet's right to self-governance. Although, the League does take great care to make it clear they have no particular interest in how those planets are actually governed. The League exists only to protect the ruling elites from the hegemony, not to protect the citizens from dictatorships or injustice. But there's no greater dictatorship than the Sindrian Diktat. Under the guidance of rogue hegemony admiral and part-time gas station manager Philip Andrada, the system of Asconia stands alone, no longer subject to hegemony rule, but clearly distinct from the petty alliances of the Persian League. Asconia is a primary fuel producer in the sector, and Andrada's Lion Guard forces have been extremely well funded as a result. But the faction's potential is often squandered by a fanatical, paranoid obsession with loyalty over competence or functionality. This brings us to the Tritachyon Corporation. If the hegemony is heir to the domain's authority, Tritachyon is heir to its technology. They originally specialized in AI, some of which was illegal under domain law due to safety concerns. But since the collapse, they've spread their influence across the sector. Tritachyon's fleets are primarily made up of high-tech ships not available to other factions, reflecting their technological superiority, which has only widened without the full power of the domain to keep the corporation in check. The hegemony may have the biggest guns, but the people on board are still using Tritachyon devices. The looming threat of the Tritachyon Corporation has only fueled the growth of the Church of Lud, a martyr that stood against the evils of technology, viewing technological progress as a corruption that threatens the humanity of its users. The Church of Lud exerts a different type of influence on the sector, but that influence typically only becomes military in nature within the Church's own territories. The Ludic Path, on the other hand, views violence as the only answer. The Path is made up of splinter cells of the Ludic faith that have essentially turned to religious terrorism. To them, the Ludic Church's diplomacy is its own form of corruption, and fire is the only force that can purify. Their enthusiasm for their cause often comes in a distant second to their enthusiasm for big explosions, and they show little to no self-preservation instinct when confronting you in their fleets, which have been subject to every possible safety override. They are the last of the major factions, although I did tell you there were 8. The remaining faction, the Independents, are not a faction in the traditional sense, but are instead listed among the factions as a way of gauging your reputation with the spacers and truly independent planets of the sector, unwilling to drink Kool-Aid no matter the flavor. The life of an independent is not an easy one, but it's up to you to decide if the friendship of a major faction is worth the baggage that will inevitably come with it. Eventually, no matter what path you choose, your growing influence will draw some scrutiny from the powers that be, and that attention only intensifies once you reach what I view as the defining mechanic of modern Starsector. The ability to colonize uninhabited planets allows you to establish a meaningful, lasting foothold in the Persian sector, and managing your colony, or colonies, takes central focus as you head into the middle of the game. The actual act of establishing a colony is fairly simple, so long as you can locate some spare crew and heavy machinery to bring to the planet in question. But locating a valuable planet can be a bit of a process. Natural resources, atmosphere, lack of atmosphere, weather, even remnants of prior civilization all determine a colony's potential output, as well as the hazard rating that determines the cost to set up industries in your brand new colony. These buildable industries and structures serve as both a source of monthly income as well as a source of protection from interference, since the existing factions are not eager for a new rival, and their agitation will only grow with your increasing power. This tension is tracked on a colony crisis meter, which will culminate in a faction event every time the meter fills up. These are partially scripted events that require you to solve the crisis either through violence or negotiation, defending your sovereignty as a legitimate faction, and cementing your position as a powerful force in the sector. Some of these scenarios are quite involved, while others are relatively simple fixes, but they all add a narrative aspect the game massively benefits from, and they make colony development by far my favorite part of the game. But these colony crises are not the only scripted aspect of Starsector, which, despite being primarily a sandbox game, features a number of fairly involved quest lines. While these quests add a strong narrative element, the way these stories are cleverly implemented and organically encountered allows Starsector to tell truly interesting, relatively in-depth stories without sacrificing the game's position as a true sandbox. Quests are basically always optional, and typically have to be deliberately sought out. Most quests trigger when certain conditions in the game are met, making the story feel like a natural consequence of your specific choices and not a railroaded diversion from your primary goals. Despite not being entirely an RPG, entirely a grand strategy game, or for that matter, entirely a space sim, Starsector manages to outperform most games in all three lanes simultaneously. The art is some of the best I've ever seen in this style of game. The lore is both well written and detailed, and the soundtrack is among my favorites across all games. I feel so positively about Starsector that my original version of this script was literally titled Starsector is Perfect. Of course, Starsector isn't perfect, but I've still elected to save my complaints about the game's limitations for another video, both because I don't want any of the game's marginal problems to get in the way of how good I think this game really is, and because the game's robust modding scene takes care of most problems many times over. Starsector may not be perfect, but it's getting about as close as a game can get.